let's squeeze in the story because it's also hugely important. The DA says there is scientific evidence that it is possible to hold the vote on time. The opposition party is opposing the IEC's Constitutional Court application to have the local government elections postponed. I'm joined now by the party's Federal Council chairperson, that is Helen Zille, joining me for that conversation. So Helen, thank you for joining me. So you're making it very clear that you will be opposing what the IEC has put forward in their papers and what they will put forward in their arguments at the Constitutional Court. Why do you believe that the election should not be postponed?
Yes, indeed, Thulasizwe. We believe the election should not be postponed because it is crucial in a democracy for an election to happen on time. That is why the election is the only event that is set down in terms of timing in our Constitution. An election is not a bribe place that you can just postpone because of the weather. It is really important in any democracy that the ruling party should not be able to manipulate the holding of elections in terms of the timeframes to its own advantage. Otherwise, if this can happen, you're going to get a situation where power-abusing ruling parties can postpone an election again and again and again, finding a pretext to do so. And they cannot even ask the Constitutional Court to postpone the election because the Constitutional Court's role is to defend the Constitution, not to change the Constitution. So we maintain that the Constitutional Court's role is to ensure that the 2021 local government election happens on time and is not postponed.
Yeah. Speaking of that, let's start on that point where you are arguing that what the IEC is seeking to do is basically to ask the Constitutional Court to rewrite or perhaps amend even the Constitution. You're talking there about Section 1592, which spells out clearly that an election needs to happen within 90 days. So is it your contention that there is no room to maneuver for the Constitutional Court? There is absolutely no room for them to interpret those provisions read with other provisions to the extent that they'll be able to say, actually, under these extenuating circumstances, we can postpone this election?
Yes, indeed, that is our contention, Thulasizwe. We think that Section 159 of the Constitution, read together with Section 1 of the Constitution, the first clause of the Constitution, makes it impossible for the Constitutional Court on its own to change that provision. Obviously, the Constitution makes provision for constitutional changes, but that is only through Parliament by the required majority, either a 2/3 majority or a 75% majority. And that is the only way that a section of the Constitution can be suspended or amended. And the Constitutional Court itself does not have the right to do so.
So let me just say hypothetically then, if you prevail at the Constitutional Court, but the IEC yet persists that it is not going to be possible to have a free and fair election within the context of a pandemic. In fact, let me pause the hypothetical question and ask you a question that actually does apply. Is it your sense, Helen Zille, that it is possible to hold a free and fair election within the context of a pandemic and hold it in October this year, given that we will be coming off a very difficult third wave with all the restrictions still in place, and vaccinations will be, what they are at the moment. Nothing to write home about, really.
Well, of course it's possible to have a free and fair and safe election in a pandemic. More than 107 countries have done that worldwide. And just this week we saw the Zambian election, and the Zambian election results held freely, fairly and safely in the middle of a pandemic because their electoral commission did its job. Our electoral commission has known since February last year that they would have to prepare for a free, fair and safe election in a pandemic. That was their only job, to get that done, and they have failed to do that. And now they want to put South Africa in a constitutional crisis by asking the Constitutional Court to deviate from its mandate of defending the Constitution and asking them to suspend or change aspects of the Constitution, which it can't do. So the IEC must get its act together. If countries all over the world could do so, then there's no excuse for South Africa, none at all. We suspect that it's because the ANC wants to postpone the election and it has its deployed cadres in key positions helping it out. That is our strong suspicion. So the bottom line is this, that the IEC must hold a free and fair election by the 27th of October, and that means that they must reopen the registration process to enable people to register for the first time or re-register, as must happen before the election. That is what the IEC must do.
As you and I know, the freeness and fairness of an election is not only judged based on what happens on actual voting day, but also the build-up period. Taking on board the political culture in South Africa, Helen Zille, that tends to favor mass-based movements and the issue of political rallies. That's our political culture. Surely that's not something that can happen in the context that we are in now. And if political parties such as the EFF and the ANC, who do like that style of campaigning, I know that you do it as well as the DA, but perhaps it could be said that you have other alternatives that you have perfected perhaps over a period of time. Surely those parties, the ANC, the EFF and others, the IFP, who prefer large rallies, door-to-door campaigning, will be disadvantaged by this, and that would strike at the heart of the freeness or the fairness of the election.
What suits political parties does not trump the Constitution, Thulasizwe. Our first job is to abide by the Constitution. And just because we would prefer it to be another way doesn't mean that we can suspend the Constitution in order to achieve that. That is why a country has a Constitution, so that there's absolute certainty about the rules of the game, and the rules of the game can't change because it suits one party or another. And we've known this since the beginning of last year, and we've known that there would have to be an election 90 days after the 5th anniversary of the election in 2016, and everybody has had the same amount of time to prepare for it, not least of all the IEC. And we all know what the rules of the game are, and if we want a constitution that is worth the paper it is written on, we must all abide by the same rules of the game and not have different parties being able to change those rules when it suits them.
So let me get to my hypothetical question then. Your argument being that what the IEC is seeking to do is not permissible within the confines of the Constitution as it is written right now. The alternative, of course, has always been put out today, that the alternative would be to have a constitutional amendment, not something that people want to go to lightly because, being the foundation of all law and order in our country, you don't want to be tinkering with it willy-nilly. And I assume I know the answer to this question, Helen, but let me put it out to you anyway. If it came down to that, if you prevailed at Constitutional Court and the judges say we cannot override what the Constitution says, go to Parliament, get an amendment, I assume you would be opposed to that too.
Well, the bottom line is this, that we would oppose the changing of the Constitution to suit the ANC and the EFF. And all sensible people should be. Parties can't change the Constitution to suit what they prefer or what they don't prefer. There is a constitutional limit on terms in government for a very good reason. And we have to get used to that. And the ANC knows there isn't time to change the Constitution. And they won't probably be able to get the two-thirds majority to do so anyway. And some constitutional experts say we need a 75% majority. That is a super majority because it affects clause 1 of the Constitution, which are the foundational principles. So whatever happens, that's a hypothetical question to change the Constitution because it can't happen in time. And also, the ANC certainly won't get a supermajority of 75% to change the Constitution in Clause 1.
Hopefully we won't get to that frankly, Helen Zille, because the foundational values, there's a reason why there's a supermajority that is required there. It's the basics that define us as a society that we don't want to tamper with. Lastly, Helen Zille, let me ask you, what will you say to people who will say that you are simply being reckless, that you want an election come hell or high water, and this is in line with the way you've been, particularly yourself, in that at some point you were reported to have said something about, just open up the country, let people, those who get infected until, we get herd immunity. And also you've been a champion of opening up really at all costs. Some will say this is par for the cause for people such as yourself who would then want an election at all cost, even if it does cost lives.
Thulasizwe, obviously every death from COVID is one death too many. We don't want unnecessary deaths in our country. Closing our economy will cause many, many deaths as well. We are now at 42% unemployment. That is an incomprehensible figure, and youth unemployment of people under 35 is over 70%. People don't survive that level of unemployment in a country. What I have always argued is that we must have proper measures to curb COVID, social distancing, sanitizing, mask wearing, but closing down an economy has unbelievable consequences, most particularly for the very poor. And those consequences are still going to come home to roost. We certainly supported the first lockdown to get our health system in gear. We certainly fully support vaccinations, and now that they're here, everyone should get vaccinated. But the economy is effectively open again. You see everybody going around their business. You can see people standing in SASSA queues. You see people in malls. Why can't they go and vote? It is not reckless to say we must abide by the Constitution and vote. And anyway, most of the epidemiologists say that in October, we will be at a very low point of infections. So it's going to be the safest of all times to go to an election. If people can stand in queues for SASSA, if they can stand in queues for the vaccination, if kids are at school, if people can fill shopping malls, if people are in restaurants, how is it reckless to call for an election?
All right, on that note, let's leave it there. That's the DA's Helen Zille there joining us and sharing their insights.